Oh, man, I tell you what, I have loved this series, just even diving into the book of Hebrews. Hebrews is complex. And I know that the one of us kind of gets us around the idea of the expanse and it's not really a dichotomy. That would be a wrong way to say it because Jesus is fully God and fully man. A dichotomy would say either one or the other, but that kind of gets us a little bit in it. But as you read it, the language, if you've been in it a little bit and studying the book of Hebrews, and for those of you that are in city groups, it's kind of hard to follow. But once you figure out, okay, it is what it is. It's to the Hebrews, it's to the Jews. It forces you to begin to look through the lens. And we should do that as we read the Bible. Like it is written to somebody. We don't just say, this is God's letter to me. And we just kind of isolate it. And it's for my quiet time. And this is what he's saying to me. You want to think about the perspective of the author had an intent. And God, by the power of the Holy Spirit, inspired that author to write to those particular people. And there's value, and God speaks to us through the word as well. But knowing that intent is important. But once you start to know the intent, it begins to actually speak more to us. So as we've been in Hebrews chapter 1, we felt that, and even in the first part, we only made it through 4 verses last week in Hebrews chapter 2. But it was important for us to hear those commands that were, anybody remember last week? Just a little quiz, Sunday school quiz. What were the 2 commands from last week? Pay attention. Don't drift. There's like 3 people that actually are going to pass the test. Everybody else fails. But there's these like specific things that you find in the book of Hebrews, and then you have some overarching kind of things that are said in each chapter. And this one, as you kind of heard the warnings in the front, like, hey, pay attention. It's very easy. So, drift happens very slowly, that nautical term. We need to think about the gospel that saved us. Don't forget about who he is, what we talked about in Hebrews chapter 1, that he's the one that he created everything. Jesus is the active force in creation. But now we're going to hear really this theme of one of us start to really come to light as Jesus was on planet Earth, that he was born of a woman, that he walked on planet Earth. He did things that we did. He had friends like we had. He had a family, and all of us are in a family, and we understand that. But the author leverages the person of who Jesus is, like in chapter 1, that he is bigger, that he is better, that he is more than you could possibly think that he is. In this particular chapter, he's leveraging it in the same way to tell the people not to give up. I said in the early week of early time when we first dove into Hebrews that this was written to the Hebrews because people were starting to drift away from their faith, and some were just hitting the eject button because the pressure cooker, in the Roman Empire for these people was on. Like it was not comfortable to be a Christian in their world and in their culture. And I think that can be very true of us. The more and more we head down the road in 2024 and into the future in our culture, it's less and less comfortable to be a Christian. At least the Christians that the Bible describes. The followers of Jesus that are true in and through the scriptures that we read. It's becoming a little bit harder. But the author would say, and I think God would say in the room today, don't give up. Like I think those are the unspoken words that you kind of hear in chapter 2 is don't give up, don't drift, pay attention. Why? Because you should not give up. There are a lot of good reasons not to give up. And I think there's people in the room that either you've said it to yourself at some point in your life, don't give up, or you've needed somebody else to say to you, clearly look you in the eyes and say, whatever you're walking through, don't give up. I think there's people in the room. I know there's people in the room. I said this at 9 because I was looking around the room and there's people that I know that are multiple people that are walking through a cancer diagnosis. There's multiple people that are either on the other side, have just gotten divorced, some that are trying to reconcile in their relationships and in their marriages. There's people that are lost in terms of, what it is that they're doing in life. And they thought, I'm going to be married at age 24 years old, 25 years old, and it's a few years after that. And they're thinking, I thought this was God's plan for my life. And the message that I think God has for us today is to not give up. But I think sometimes that can feel a little bit like a platitude. Like, don't give up. Good luck with that. When people say that to you, when they're married, they have a great job, when everything's going right for them, and they throw out the coffee cup verse and then tag on it to not give up. I always want to ask why. But today I want to really answer that. Actually, God's going to answer it in and through his word. But I was thinking about my own story, and maybe this will be an encouragement to somebody. But back when I was in college, some of you know I played college baseball. I got injured. My plan was to have surgery, rehab, and jump back in. But life got a hold of me. Sin got a hold of me. I was in Tallahassee, and I had a group of roommates. I know some of them still today, but we were into the wrong stuff. You can paint your own picture. I'm not going to get so deep into it. Some of you have heard some of these parts of my testimony, but just wasn't doing the right. And it was one of the darkest years of my life. And I got to a point where, and I really, God was not in the framework, and God probably was a part of this, this sovereign decision of changing my life at this point. But it didn't like launch me into church or anything like that. But I knew that if I did this for another year, that I might not survive. Like I might not live. It was that kind of lifestyle, those kind of friends, the things that I was involved in. And I knew, okay, I got to get out of here. So I moved out of the house that I was in, and I moved in with one of my childhood friends' mom, who still lived in Tallahassee. And I thought I was just going to be there for a month, just kind of stop over. And just like anything else, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, where you're like, it's just going to be this little portion of my life. Well, I'm just going to be here for a minute. And then there's like years later, you're like, I'm still here. I should have hung a picture on the wall and unboxed my clothes. Because God has different plans. Anyway, I was there for probably, when I go back and think about it, probably 8 months to close to a year. And I had pulled myself, didn't live anywhere near campus. I was away from all of my friends, all of the people that I was close to. And you got to think, I played baseball from, age 6 till college. I had a built-in brotherhood my whole life. Like people that I depended on, people that I had fun with, instantaneous friends. You didn't have to work as much for friendships. And it wasn't always easy. There was teams you were on where you were either unliked or you had people you didn't like. But you had a brotherhood. And then all of a sudden, a slow drain in that year. I had friends in Tallahassee, lived with some of them, but that attachment, that built-in kind of forced accountability and brotherhood was gone. And now I'm off campus. I'm living with my friend's mom. I've got a job, and I have no friends. I'm really not hanging out with anybody. I had people that I knew that I could call and say, hey, what's going on? But as far as hanging out with people, I went to work, I went to school, and I came home. And that was it. And I realized in the middle of that, I didn't even know then what I know now, is I was depressed. Like it's one of those words you don't want to say, like, I suffered and struggled with depression. I was depressed. I was very sad. I was very lonely, and I thought, is this going to be am I going to get so disconnected that I'm never going to reconnect with life? Am I going to find friends? Do I even know how to make new friends? How is this even going to happen? But, and I remember sitting there and having this moment. She lived in an apartment complex, and you probably remember these, or if you've ever lived in one. You might live in one now, where they've got a pool, but it's not that nice. And it's like there's not many people use it. Like there's a few people that use it, and the ones that do are kind of creepy. I think I was the creepy one because nobody was there. I used it more than anybody. Like in the middle of the day, most people went to work. They're like, oh, they got home and he's there, with his jam box. I had a jam box, But I'm 52. You jam boxes? Anybody? Dual cassette, grooving, set that bad boy down and listen to the tunes. It wasn't Bluetooth players back then. And I was listening to Travis Tritt. Yes, I'm a good old boy and a little bit of a redneck. And I remember sitting there feeling sorry for myself and then hearing Travis Tritt just sing to my soul, here's a quarter, call someone who cares. And I was like, I got to do something with my life. So I called a friend of mine who was living in Gainesville, and I had heard he was like moving back because he needed to come back to God's country in Tallahassee. Some of y'all get that. So he was coming back. He had a similar experience, just not a good couple of years in Gainesville, and I can imagine. And then we talked about that. We had kind of some similarities. And I had a friend that played football at Wofford. He had gotten injured just like me. We got on the phone. We were talking about it, and he's like, "Man, I'm coming back to Tallahassee." And he's like, not sure what the next move is for me. Super sad about being disconnected from playing football. So I was like, we should all move in together. We all moved in together, and we all had so much in common. We could empathize with each other's situation. We saw things from each other's point of view and perspective. We're same age, going through the same things. There's something special about that college season of life. You remember that? I mean, for like, you don't have more relative connected with more people than in those seasons. In that late middle school into high school and into college, all these people you know. And there's tons of them, and then all of a sudden you get in your 30s, you're like, where are all my friends? Because it's like everybody has kids, and that relative connective tissue goes away. But it was like magic, instantaneously. I remember coming home from work, pulling into it wasn't a driveway, it was like the yard. You just drove into the yard. And there's just Jeeps, because that's what everybody drove in college. If you see a Jeep, you don't even need to think college, you just college, Jeep. Pulled up into the driveway, and my roommate, who is 6'5", he played football, 6'5", 6'6", probably 285 pounds. He's in the front yard. He had bought himself a baby pool from Walmart, and he had his lounge chair sitting in it like this, and he was like, woo! I mean, just full on, and I was like, everything's gonna be all right. I knew it. It was just like, it was an intact nature of being together and brotherhood. Now, I say that because that season of isolation and depression for me is really a picture of a microcosm of what is happening in our culture. A lot of people are isolated, and we don't know it. We've kind of been pulled out by, I said it last week, by technology. In fact, I read multiple articles that said we're the most depressed and anxious culture of all time, especially in the West, where we've got more money and more technology. In fact, words like empathy, I read an article in the Washington Post, it's taken a nosedive in the last 20 years. And part of that is we're not around each other enough. In our isolation, we've become more navel-gazing and looking at ourselves, seeing ourselves, hanging out with ourselves, and communicating online, but almost a pseudo-connection, not a real connection with human beings, but a pseudo-connection with human beings has made us more selfish and a more individualistic culture. I think we've said that in here before. But one of the things that has been on the chopping block because of that is empathy, which is interesting to me. Being able to see things from other people's perspective. It's the human connection, as all of us are brothers and sisters and as far as mankind, right? We should be able to connect with each other, relate to one another. But we're struggling as a society to do that. We're separate. And in that, how do you walk through the hardest times in your life? How do you walk through cancer? How do you walk through divorce? How do you walk through loneliness? What's the solution to the problems that we go through? How do you walk through isolation or transitioning from being in college to being a single person that's got a career? How do we make those turns and transitions? Right now, as a society, we make them alone. We make them alone. But what I love about where we're headed today is the author says this, and I think God's going to say it in the room by the power of his word and the Holy Spirit, is don't give up. There's good news. And the author's not going to leave you hanging like on a coffee cup and say, don't give up, and kind of turn around and walk the other way to their nice, happy life. He's going to give reasons. And there's multiple in this passage. We're going to highlight two as we dig in. So if you got your Bible, turn with me to Hebrews chapter 2. We covered the first 4 verses last week. Again, the don't drift. Pay attention to the gospel. Don't drift away from what you've heard. And now as we jump into verse 5, he's going to begin to uproot some other reasons why we shouldn't give up in the world that we live in. For it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we are speaking. It has been testified somewhere, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. All right, I need somebody to come up on stage and tell me what that means. Okay? Hebrews is tough. I mean, we're wondering about the language, but remember what I said in the beginning. This is to the Hebrews. This would not be a mystery to them because this type of language is a comparative language. So when you read this, we'll start at the very beginning in verse 5. It says, for it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come. The author's saying, hey, you need to begin to understand that mankind, that human beings, you have a special place in God's heart. You're different than the angels. In what way? Okay, he's talking about the world of which we are speaking. It has been testified somewhere. And then he quotes, anybody know what he's quoting here? It's in the Old Testament. Hebrews quotes the Old Testament a lot. Psalm 8, man, somebody really, you just got a gold star in Sunday school for sure. Psalm 8, it's a Psalm of David. You set the sun, the moon, the stars, everything that we see in the sky. What is man? You're mindful of him, the Son of Man, that you care for him. What's David saying? He's saying the same thing that the author of Hebrews is saying in 1 and 2. In 1, he's saying Jesus is not just the Son of God, he's God. Jesus is not just a part of creation. He is the one that breathed creation out. He was the active force in creation, the cosmos, the expanse of the universe, and he's human. And David is saying, hey, I can't believe the God of the universe, all the way down to the micro level, inside of who I am, he knows who I am. David would later say what? He knows the hairs on my head. He knit me together in my mother's womb. He knows me better than anyone knows me. So the author of Hebrews is highlighting here, human beings, you, people, are your image bearers. You are special in God's eyes. God cares about you. I mean, that would be a side reason, hey, to not give up. The God of the universe actually cares about you. That's not one of the ones we have highlighted today, but it certainly is jumping off the pages right now, right? He goes on in verse 7, like we just read, he says, you made him a little lower than the angels. So he's just saying, look, this is when you see angels, when you see them in Scripture, what do they say right away? Always. They have to say it first because nobody's going to listen unless they say it. Do not be afraid. Because they look like lightning. They come down. They're angels. There's something that's like, woo, I'm going to die. I mean, people think they're going to die. Don't be afraid. I've got news. I've got good tidings of great joy, right? I mean, they come in and say, don't be afraid. You made human beings a little lower than the angels. And then you got the semicolon, which is saying yet. Some of your translations actually say yet. Yet you have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Again, he's highlighting the nature of God's relationship with human beings, saying there's a special thing between God and man. Like in Genesis 1 and 2, he put creation in subjection to Adam and Eve. They controlled it. By God's authority, they ran planet Earth. They were crowned with glory and honor over all of creation, over the animals. They named the animals, all of the stuff. And so the author of Hebrews is saying everything was good. God's intent for all of this is different. You know, because I think the Jews knew, like, angels, are here. When we see them, it's like they're glowing, and they were just God in the presence of God. He's making sure, hey, understand this. Don't you remember that man was crowned with glory and honor and everything was put in subjection under his feet? But listen to this. It says, now in putting everything in subjection to him in some of your translations is mankind. In the ESV, it's where it translates down to the Koine Greek, but that word in the Greek is a broad one, and it's mankind. So now you see him putting everything in subjection to him, mankind. He left nothing outside of his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him. I mean, the author's throwing it out there because they're going to get it, but we're not going to probably get it as much as a Jewish audience would. They know, because they know the Pentateuch really good. They know Genesis really good. At present, we do not see everything in subjection to him. In other words, hey, Genesis chapter 3, then the serpent, right, begins to speak lies to mankind, to Adam and Eve, right? And what happens? They think they can be their own boss. They think they can be gods. They think they can run their own show. They're like, God is the authority, is the power. They want to have their own authority and power. They want to run the rebellion begins. And what happens? Go ahead and put that back up. This is what happens. At present time, we do not see everything in subjection to him. No longer is there control. We like to think, and we like to create control for ourselves as human beings on planet Earth. We think we're in control. If I make enough money, if I get the right car, if I live in the right neighborhood, if I, get myself here, we can be safe. I have enough money in retirement 401k, we can be. But we all know, there's such a thing that we live in Florida. We have hurricanes, right? Their control is a fantasy. We don't have it. The world is not in subjection to us. The cone of uncertainty should tell us that we don't have control. When you watch Timmy Deegan on the weather, you just see in the cone and it's like this. It's not like we know where the hurricane's going. I mean, tsunamis exist. We do not have control. Things have flown out of control. Not only is the earth groaning in its brokenness, as it says in Romans 8, like it's groaning for redemption. The physical earth is groaning for redemption. There's sin. Jesus blazed the trail. The punitive damages of sin. By faith, we can put our faith in Jesus, and there is no more punishment. He took the punishment on the cross. But the power of sin still exists. And you can be sinned against by other human beings. And many of you in the room have been, right? And you can sin, and you've sinned against people. So sin exists. We do not see everything in subjection to man. Things have flown out of control. All right, verse 9. See, it takes a minute to get through Hebrews, but it's super interesting in the language that he's using to that particular audience. And he's letting them know, hey, don't give up. There's something amazing about how God sees you and what God will provide for you. And particularly Jesus, right? And that's where this comes in. But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus. So now the hymn changes, right? But we see him, namely Jesus, right? He's made lower than the angels. So what's the author saying? Jesus became human. He became one of us. He became one of mankind. He was crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. This is where he's starting to make a case for not giving up, because he's like the number one fear for any human being should be death. Like that life is short. Like we're not going to be here. Like everybody, that's something that everybody, it's the depressing thing for young people. You're like, no way. Is that really going to happen? Am I going to die? Yes. You will be 52 and you'll get up and go, I'm dying. It'll happen. You might not think about it right now, but you get a little older and you realize I've lived more years than I got left. And you're like, man, that's weird. You start taking vitamins. I take my mom's been trying to give me vitamins my whole life. And now I take them, You get a little older, you're like, man, I'm trying to extend this thing a little bit. Death's coming. But what's beautiful is we begin to hear the author say it, and I think God's saying it in the room. Death has lost its sting. He suffered death. He took something that, granted, many people, most in here, unless Jesus comes back, tonight, I don't know why it's always at night. If you died tonight, do you know where you would go? It's always was at night. I was like, what if you died during the daytime? Who knows? Sorry, I think about these things. And you're the 11. You get my thoughts outwardly. But he suffered death. He tasted death for us, for everyone. He became like us. He became one of us, the star breather, the one that created everything. He can relate to you. He walked in areas that we walk. He had a family. He had siblings. It's amazing to think that the one that created it all was one of us. But you're beginning to see and hear why he had to be. Why did Jesus have to become human? Because he suffered death and tasted death and the separation from God in a way that we never will. Even though death is very, very possible for most of the people in this room. But eternal death is not. Death because of sin, it's by faith in Jesus. He's blazed a path that we might be saved, that eternal life is possible for those that put their faith in Jesus. Verse 10, this is awesome. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist. Again, throwback to Hebrews 1. He's saying, can you imagine this? Everything exists because of Jesus. In bringing many sons to glory. Again, that word sons is a broad word. Sons and daughters can be used. Some of your translations actually might say sons and daughters to glory. And then he said, and in bringing many sons to glory should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. The founder, so Jesus is made perfect through suffering and creating perfection in us. Now, what I love in this is the word founder. And if you do a little bit of a word study, And I'm not saying you have to do that every time you read the Bible. When you see a word like the founder, it kind of just, it stuck out. And I saw a lot of little, parentheses and little side references in my Bible. And I'm like, okay, what is this? So if you dig down into the Koine Greek and see how it translates, founder is kind of it's a word that part of it does make sense. Founder's like the first, right? The first one. Like if you founded a company, you're the one that started it. You started this whole thing. You founded it. You were the forerunner. You were the first one here. The founder of some of you people were founding members of Ocean City Church. I think I saw Darren Weinger in here a little bit ago. He was around from the very beginning, begrudgingly, but he was here. I'm kidding. He loves it here. But the founder, so that's Jesus. Some of your translations say, pioneer, right? Some of you got pioneer in there. So like the one that's blazing the trail in front of you. In other areas of Scripture, we call Jesus the firstborn amongst many brothers, or brothers and sisters. Again, that's a broad term in the Koine Greek. So he's the first one to be alive from the dead. And then what's he doing? He's invited. He's made a way for releasing the rest of the captives from death, right? But he's the founder. Deep down in that word, the way that it was meant for them was the word champion. So how can I have this confidence? When I say don't give up, what are the reasons? Well, we have a champion. We have a pioneer. And that word champion for them is different, I think, than the way that we think of it. Like, when I think of champion, I think of Olympic champion. But this is in there like my champion or our champion. And that's what the way the author's putting it. It's like you have somebody that goes before you, the one that is the winner for you. Think about in, some of the ancient texts that they would know. The Iliad, Homer's Iliad. You've got Hector, who's the champion for who? Anybody know their history? The Trojans. For Troy. Come on, y'all have seen the movie, Brad Pitt, he's Achilles. Wow. Man, y'all are quiet too. What's wrong with you people? I'm kidding. So you've got Hector. He's the champion. They had such confidence that he would win the battle. They didn't worry. They didn't fear. They weren't worried about what was going to happen next when they would go to war. They knew that he knew how to train everybody. He was a strategist. He was the champion. He would go, people would stay at home. Hector would take his boys out and they would go to battle. And who was the front line guy? He was Hector. He was the champion. I don't know if any of y'all have ever played recreational sports, but there's always a champion on the team, right? Like somebody that's the guy. Like if he doesn't show up for the game, we're in trouble. Right? I remember coaching I-9, and that happened several times. I think I told the story. Remember Greg Jones' boy? He was a champion. Of course, his dad played in the NFL and was big and fast, and he was on the team. He was younger than everybody on the team. I don't think he should have even been on the team, but we're like, yeah, he can be on the team. If he was late coming to the game, everybody would be like, oh, man. What are we going to do? Because he would sit back there. We just give him the ball. At the end of the day, we would let other kids do stuff. And then we're like, okay, it's third down. Just hand the ball to him. And it was like that, too, that age. It was like, just give it to him. And he would sit back there and just hold the ball and look around and be like, I'm fitting to score, y'all. And just stand there for a minute. And then, boom, he would be gone and score instantaneously. But he wasn't there. If he wasn't there, everybody's like, oh, what's going to happen? I don't know what we're going to do. We're playing that team that's got the guy that throws the ball, does the thing. What are we going to do? What's going on? And then we'd see Greg Jones coming with his boy holding his hand coming up. We go, yeah, we're going to win this. We knew because the champion was here. He's the one that goes before us. My roommate, the big guy in the little kiddie pool, he was my champion in college, man. We would go out and do stuff, go to the pool hall or go to a football game or go to a baseball game. You go out with a guy that's 6'6", 285 that played football, you just don't worry about a lot. I had a roommate that was so mouthy. He was Italian. He would write checks that his skinny little Italian butt could not cash. And you didn't have to worry because we had a Gary. And Gary was huge. And Gary was so nice. He would tell people, people wouldn't notice that Gary's with us and Matt would walk around, all, Italian, doing his thing, be bowing up. People would look around, he'd be talking smack and doing whatever, and they wouldn't see. And then, you'd have guys that just like, we're going to squash you and kill you. And then Gary would just kind of part the waters and go, is there a problem here? And guys would just bow up to him occasionally. He'd say, man, please don't, And Gary had the biggest hands in history, like Andre the Giant hands. And he did knock people out occasionally. And he didn't want to. He just did it because he was the champion. He was our champion. And it was fun to have a Gary. Everybody needs a Gary. Jesus is our champion. He's our founder. He's our forerunner. He is the one that didn't fight people. He fought the devil and hell and defeated death. The one thing that matters most to you and me at the end of the day. He fought death. That is the story of David and Goliath. David was what? He was the champion for the people. They didn't even regard him. It's such a picture of Jesus and not you being the better David. Like, you could be a David. I would never teach you that principle out of Scripture. You could defeat the Goliaths of your life. You could be just like David. That is a picture of Jesus. That is a picture of the champion going before you and defeating things that you could never defeat. And it's a picture of how we many days regard Jesus, and we don't think he's going to do the things that we think he's going to do. And at the end of the day, all those people realized after David had knocked him out right in the forehead with a sling, cut his head off with his own sword, told him he was going to do it before he did it, and marched it around the town and said, what do you people think now? Champion! Right? Jesus is our champion. Therefore, we walk around more than conquerors with no fear, knowing that he's won the battle. Verse 11, this gets better, guys. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. I won't spend a lot of time here, but I want you to understand something about, because I think that word sanctifies, which means set apart. Holiness is sometimes a word that's used. We've used the word progressive sanctification in here, like, God justifies, and we can't. Sins past, present, and future are annihilated by the cross of Jesus Christ. We don't have to work for our salvation, but then there's this thing called sanctification in which we're supposed to get better and better and better and better and be more like Christ. But sometimes we think that we're not sanctified. I just want you to understand this. This is one of those concepts in the Bible that gets a little bit difficult. Sometimes we think it's on us to sanctify ourselves. You do not become sanctified in and of yourselves. What does it say here? It's very clear. Sanctification comes from one source, and that one source is not you. In fact, you read, the best example is in 1 Corinthians. It immediately, what the Apostle Paul says, to the saints at Corinth, or in some of your translations, to the sanctified. He's getting ready to tell the saints, hey, don't get drunk at communion. Like, these are the saints. So they aren't that sanctified, if you know what I mean, right? He's getting ready to tell them, hey, quit. Y'all are the most proud and arrogant people I've ever. He just goes, he lays into them straight away. It's like, you got a guy who's incest. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. He jumps on, he's like, dude, this is, what's happening here should not be happening. But yet, what's he call them? Saints. Because Jesus sanctifies. God doesn't look at you any different because of the way that you've lived or the way that you're living. You are sanctified by Jesus. You do not earn your salvation or your sanctification. That's not something that you do. You become saints and you wear the righteousness of Christ. When Jesus did what he did, all of a sudden God looks at you the way that he looks at Jesus. His righteousness. That's the big, great exchange. Your sin went with Jesus into the grave. He took on your sin and your shame. Guess what you got? And you didn't pay for it. His righteousness. Now, can we become more Christ-like? Yes, absolutely. That should be the desire of our heart. That's progressive sanctification, that we would become more like Christ. But even that comes through the grace of God. Again, we move in and finish verse 11's amazing. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers. Again, that translation is broad. brothers and sisters in some of your translations. So that is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. That is why he is not ashamed to call them his siblings, his kin. Verse 12 saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. He's quoting Psalm 22. In the midst of the congregation, I will sing of your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, and the children God has given me. He's quoting Isaiah. He's quoting those two passages because those were passages of desperation in which the authors were wondering if God was going to show up, David and Isaiah. And the author of Hebrews is saying, well, God has shown up in the person of Jesus, and he's here, and he's your brother. That's the second reason that we don't give up, because he is your brother. Verse 14 says, therefore, children share in flesh and blood. He himself likewise, as your brother, partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to slavery. You're enslaved to the death, the impending doom. And many of us live life in that way. We spend all of our lives trying to save ourselves, trying to protect ourselves, trying to create a situation in which we could, at least in our mind, deny death and extend our life and our happiness. It's a shackling and a chaining that Jesus was able to break by defeating the devil, saying, you've got life. You've gone from death to life. Why is this important? Well, if he can't represent us, then he can't redeem us. He's the champion, but he's also our brother, which means he gets us. He sees things from our perspective, and he's not ashamed of us. This is pretty incredible because as a sibling, I have a brother. Brothers can be ashamed of you. I was a little brother, 3 years younger. And my brother, he had to take me to school at some point, and he did not like it. He had a 78 Camaro. It was red. It was sweet, and it was cool. And I made that Camaro so uncool by riding in it, at least according to him. I remember one day he straight up, I was just yelling at him because he was mad at me about something. He was going to drop me off, way past the middle school because he didn't want to be around me. He didn't want people to see him with his twerpy little brother. And I'm in there yelling at him, and he's driving like this, just going, and he just went, bing, punched me. Instantaneous black eye. I had to walk in, carrying shame into school because of my brother. But nobody like a sibling can bring you more shame and more pride in an instant, and more confidence. My brother fought for me multiple times. One time he punched a guy's braces through his lip that was messing with me. And his mom was pretty upset about it. But I loved it. I mean, violence is violence, and it's wrong until somebody commits violence on your behalf. And that is no joke. When somebody comes to your aid and fights for you, there is nothing like it. But the thing about Jesus is, he wipes out the shame side. In fact, this is crazy. I did not say this at 9, and I want to say this to you. When you read the genealogies in the Bible, you read the book of Matthew, it has Jesus' genealogy. You get to that, and you're like, why am I reading all this? It's this person, it's Tamar, it's Hezron, it's this person. And you go through the whole thing, and you're like, why am I reading this? Well, there's multiple reasons. In their day, when the Bible's written, in that first century, when you read the Gospels, that's what kings did. They would display their genealogy. Like everybody would know, this is why they're king. Look at their kingship. Look at the line. You got Henry the what, Henry the this, and this, and that goes down the line. And they would show their genealogy. But you know what kings would do? They would skip all the shameful people in their family. They wouldn't post them on there, like the uncle that's drunk all the time, he's not on there. The person that's over here that just did all the stuff that's unsightly and we can't have him on the deal. They would remove all the shame people. Do you know what, if you look at Jesus' genealogy, I mean, you don't even get out of the people from Genesis. I mean, you got murderers. You got Rahab, who wasn't a Jew, and she was a prostitute. I mean, nobody was putting a prostitute on their genealogy. You got murderers. You got, unwed mothers. You got, people that shouldn't have been on a king's genealogy. All the way down the line. It was crazy. You got Ruth, who was a Moabite. In the genealogy of Christ, that would have been somebody that a king would have left off. Not Jesus. He's like, ooh, I'm not ashamed. The broken ones, the outsiders. They're all in his genealogy. They're all my brothers and sisters. They're the ones I go to war for. They're the ones that I'm the founder and perfecter of their faith. I'm the one that's out front. I'm the one that's going to take the abuse and the punishment. I'm the one that's going to take on their sin. I'm the one that's going to be for them. I mean, it's redeeming so much broken kinship in the Bible right away in Genesis. Think about Cain and Abel. Am I my brother's keeper? Jesus redeems it instantly with you and me. Yes, I am my brother's keeper. In fact, I am the shepherd of their soul. So different. And we need that. Don't you want an older brother that's not ashamed of you, that cares for you, that will fight for you? You have one. Don't give up. You've got a champion. You've got an older brother. You've got someone that fights for you. And oh, by the way, that older brother, he created the universe. Everything that you see, that you love, everything that you don't understand, it was created by him and for him. And oh, by the way, he's your brother. He knows you. He knows your most intimate thoughts. He walked in your shoes. He can empathize with you. He can get down in the pit with you. He doesn't say, look, I'm just going to be the king that ejects you out of every horrible situation. He says, I'm the brother that's going to jump down into the pit with you and say, we're going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Don't give up because I'm walking right beside you. I'm not ashamed of anything that you've done. I'm not ashamed that you feel insufficient in this valley of cancer or divorce or loneliness. I am here for you. I was willing to die for you and bleed out on Mount Calvary. What would you think I would do? He who did not, what? Spare his own son. How will he he's going to graciously give us all things. I don't know where you've come from or what you're walking through or what needs to be said to you, but I don't want any spiritual platitude or flippant. Just don't give up. I want you to hear that you have a champion. And you have an older brother that is not ashamed of you. Anything that you've done, any road that you've walked, and he's certainly not scared of anything that you've got in front of you that you're scared of right now. Let's stand. God, we love you. We love that you didn't leave anything on the table, that you completed everything. You've done everything. And you did it for the Father's glory, and that was for our good. We are the beneficiaries. We are the inheritors. We are the ones that are seated at the right hand with you. We get to be your brothers and sisters. We just come, we want to worship you and thank you that you've included us and that you're not ashamed.